I used to think the worst kind of humiliation happened in private. A quiet argument, a cold goodbye, two people realizing something had quietly died between them. I was wrong. Sometimes humiliation happens under perfect summer light, surrounded by vineyards and polite applause. Sometimes it happens when the person you love decides to rewrite your place in their life in front of strangers. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 45 years old, and until recently I ran a manufacturing plant in Toledo, Ohio. Decent job, long hours, a profit-sharing plan that had finally started to look like real retirement money. I had rebuilt my life carefully after my first marriage ended. Then 6 years ago I met Daniel Hammond. Daniel was charming in a quiet way. Easy smile, warm voice, the kind of man who seemed comfortable anywhere. When we met, he was trying to launch a small online craft business, selling handmade decorations and personalized gifts. It wasn't exactly booming, but Daniel had enthusiasm, and I believed in helping people build something real. So when he said he needed equipment, embroidery machines, bulk materials, design software, I wrote a check. $50,000. He called it support. I called it an investment. We never put formal paperwork in place. Just trust. That was my first mistake. Daniel had 2 children from his previous relationship. Connor, 14, quiet, athletic, always with a soccer ball nearby. Emma, 11, curious about everything, especially science experiments and math puzzles. My own son, Jake, 16, lived with his father in Columbus, though he spent plenty of weekends with me. Blended families are strange creatures. You learn the rhythms slowly. You learn where everyone fits. By the time Daniel and I had been together 6 years, I thought we had found our balance. I owned a 3-bedroom house with a decent yard in a good school district. Daniel and the kids had folded themselves into that space over time until it felt like a life we were building together. That illusion lasted right up until Saturday, September 16th. Daniel's cousin was getting married at a boutique vineyard a couple of hours from Toledo. The venue looked like something pulled from a wedding magazine. Rolling hills, white wooden chairs in perfect rows, stone archways covered in ivy. Soft, late summer sunlight spilled across the fields like the world had been adjusted for maximum romance. Photographers love places like that. Reality tends to hate them. Daniel spent most of the morning getting ready. Hair styled, new gray suit pressed perfectly. He stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie. "You nervous?" I asked from the doorway. "About what?" he said. "Weddings make people weird." He laughed and shook his head. "It's not my wedding." I smiled. At the time, it sounded harmless. I put on a navy dress and low heels, something comfortable enough for gravel paths and standing through speeches. Since I planned to leave a little earlier than Daniel and stop for gas on the way home, I drove separately. That detail would matter more than I knew. We arrived close to the same time, a little after 3:30. The ceremony was set for 4. Guests were already drifting across the gravel lot toward the main building. Daniel grabbed the gift from his back seat, a silver picture frame we had picked out the week before, and we walked toward the entrance side by side. Near the doorway stood the reception table, white linen cloth, guest book open beside a tidy stack of envelopes. Behind it stood a woman in her mid-50s wearing pearls and holding a clipboard, the kind of wedding coordinator who had probably seen every possible version of family drama and judged most of them silently. She looked up with a practiced smile. "Names, please." Daniel stepped forward. "Daniel Hammond," he said, signing the guest book with quick, confident strokes. The coordinator nodded politely, then she glanced at me. "And you are?" I waited. The pause lasted less than a second, but it was long enough for my mind to expect the obvious answer. Partner, Rachel, something normal. Daniel smiled that light social smile people use for strangers. "Oh," he said casually, "she's just a friend." For a moment, the world stopped moving. The words hung between us like something dropped into still water. "Just a friend." I looked at him, waiting for the correction, waiting for the laugh, waiting for the quick, embarrassed recovery. It never came. Daniel had already turned back toward the coordinator. He was pointing at something on the seating chart, talking as if nothing strange had happened, as if 6 years of our life had just been erased in one sentence. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something cleaner than that. Understanding. The coordinator looked uncomfortable. 2 guests standing nearby became deeply interested in the flower arrangements. I smiled slowly. Then I said, just loud enough for everyone within a few feet to hear, "Actually, I'm just the ex." Daniel's head snapped toward me. "Rachel, wait." I didn't. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard his voice rise. "Rachel, come on, don't do this!" The string quartet nearby was tuning its instruments. Champagne glasses clinked at the outdoor bar. Guests laughed somewhere behind the vineyard building. Life kept moving. Mine had just changed. My heels crunched softly over the gravel as I crossed the lot back to my SUV. I didn't look back. The distance felt longer than it should have, but I kept going, climbed in, started the engine, and pulled onto the narrow county road leading away from the vineyard. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was normal. The calm surprised me. But sometimes when the last piece of a puzzle falls into place, the chaos stops. You just see the picture clearly. About 4 minutes after I left, my phone started buzzing. Then buzzing again. Daniel, his mother, his aunt, someone named Pam. At a red light, I glanced at the screen. "Rachel, please come back." It was a misunderstanding. "Daniel says you misunderstood. This is embarrassing." I turned the phone off and kept driving. What I didn't know then was that those 4 minutes had already been enough. Enough for Daniel's mother to pull him aside and demand an explanation. Enough for guests to start whispering. Enough for someone to realize the exchange had been caught in background footage from the wedding videographer. The dominoes had already started falling, and I was halfway home. I pulled into my driveway around 6:30. The house felt bigger than usual, quieter. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, kicked off my heels, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and sat on the couch, still wearing my dress, staring at the dark television. My phone stayed off for another half hour. I wasn't ready yet. When I finally turned it back on, the screen lit up immediately. 43 missed calls, 62 text messages, 3 voicemails. Most were from Daniel, but not all. I was scrolling through them when a new message appeared. "Jake." My son rarely texted urgently. "Mom, you need to call me. It's important." I pressed the call button. He answered instantly. "Mom," Jake said, voice tight, "I need to tell you something about Daniel." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" There was a pause. Then Jake said quietly, "I recorded something at the wedding before you left." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean you recorded something?" Jake exhaled. "I wasn't supposed to be there, not officially." That sounded exactly like him. "Start from the beginning," I said. "I was at Tyler's house this weekend," he said. "His mom is friends with Daniel's cousin, the one getting married. They needed extra hands setting things up at the vineyard, so we drove down that morning." That explained why he was there. "I saw you and Daniel arrive," he continued. "I was going to come say hi, but you walked toward the front entrance and I was carrying folding chairs. I figured I'd catch you later." I leaned forward, the bourbon glass forgotten in my hand. "Then what?" "There's a side entrance behind the main building," Jake said. "Near the hedge line. I walked past it while carrying equipment." His voice lowered. "And I saw Daniel there." My stomach tightened again. "Was he alone?" "No." Jake paused. "There was a woman with him." The room seemed to shrink. "What woman?" I asked. "I don't know her name," Jake said, "but they were standing really close, like, not normal close." I felt my pulse slow instead of race. "What did you do?" I thought it looked weird, so I pulled out my phone. Of course he did. 16-year-olds record everything. "You recorded them?" "Yeah." I closed my eyes briefly. "What exactly did you record, Jake?" His answer came quietly. "They kissed." The words didn't feel like a shock. More like confirmation. "A real kiss?" "Yeah, not like a greeting." He paused. "They were laughing first." She touched his arm, then he leaned in. I stared at the dark television screen. "How long?" 4 seconds, maybe, Jake said. Long enough that it didn't look accidental. "What happened after?" "They talked," he said. "I was still recording." He took a breath. He said, "See you at the reception." My fingers tightened slightly around the glass. "And what did she say?" Jake answered softly. "She said, act natural." The room went still. "Send it to me," I said. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. Video file received. I pressed play. The footage was shaky, handheld, taken from behind the hedge, but the image was unmistakable. Daniel stood beside the side entrance to the vineyard building, wearing the same gray suit I had helped him zip into that morning. The woman stood facing him. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair. Elegant black dress. Too close. She said something that made him laugh. Then she reached out and smoothed the front of his jacket. My chest felt hollow. Daniel leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick, awkward peck. A real kiss. 4 seconds, Jake had estimated perfectly. When they separated, the woman smiled and adjusted Daniel's lapel like they were sharing a private joke. Then I heard Daniel on the recording. "See you at the reception." The woman glanced toward the main building. "Just act natural." I watched the clip again. Then once more. Not because I needed to confirm what I had seen, but because I wanted to understand it fully. The casual familiarity, the ease, the fact that Daniel didn't look nervous. He looked practiced. When the video ended, I saved it, then backed it up in more than one place. Years working with financial systems had taught me one useful habit. Important records should never live in only one location. Jake was still on the phone. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. I leaned back against the couch. The bourbon glass was still untouched. "I'm going to fix this," I said. He waited. "How?" I answered calmly. "Legally." The next morning I woke earlier than usual. 6:30. The sky outside my bedroom window was still pale gray. I showered, dressed, and packed a folder with everything I might need. Bank statements, property records, investment summaries. The video was already saved to a flash drive in my purse. By 7:30, I was on the road to Columbus. The drive gave me time to think about the last 6 years, about every strange moment I had excused. Daniel staying late, working. Daniel suddenly needing more money for inventory. Daniel's vague talk about business partnerships. Small cracks are easy to ignore when the larger structure still looks stable. By 10:30, I was parking outside a restored brownstone office building near downtown Columbus. A small brass plaque beside the door read, "Caroline Hayes, family law attorney." Walking through that door always felt strange. Caroline had once handled my divorce. Over the years, because of Jake and the overlap in our families, our lives had crossed in complicated ways. She opened the office door before I even knocked. "Rachel," she said. Caroline looked exactly the same as always. Sharp eyes, short dark hair, no-nonsense expression. "Come in." Her office smelled faintly of coffee and old legal paper. She gestured to a chair. "Sit." I placed my folder on the desk. Caroline studied my face. "What happened?" So I told her. Everything. The vineyard, the reception table, Daniel introducing me as a friend, Jake's video. Caroline listened without interrupting. When I finished, I handed her the flash drive. She plugged it into her computer and played the file in silence. Daniel laughing, the woman in the black dress, the kiss. When the clip ended, Caroline leaned back slowly. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked. Her voice was calm, serious. "Once we start, there's no going back to normal." I met her eyes. "Normal already ended yesterday." Caroline nodded once. "Then let's talk about assets." I opened the folder. "The house," I said, "paid off, roughly $320,000. Caroline made a note. "The lake property I inherited 4 years ago, about $475,000. More notes. "My profit-sharing account from the plant, just over $200,000. Caroline looked up. "Anything else?" I hesitated, then said quietly, "There's an offshore account." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "How much?" "About $190,000. She didn't react. She just wrote it down. "What about Daniel?" she asked. I exhaled slowly. "I gave him $50,000 3 years ago for his business." Caroline looked up immediately. "Loan agreement?" "No." "Written contract?" "No." "Anything?" I thought for a moment. "Yes." "What?" "A cashier's check?" Her pen paused. "Memo line?" I nodded. "Business startup loan." For the first time since I had walked into her office, Caroline smiled. "Well," she said quietly, "that helps." Caroline turned her computer screen toward me. "We're going to move quickly," she said. "How quickly?" 72 hours. She opened a legal template and began typing. "The first step is protection," she explained. "We document ownership and isolate your assets before anything escalates. Everything, house, investments, lake property, would be formally documented and placed under legal structure that made ownership unmistakably clear. If Daniel tried to claim partnership later, the evidence would already be organized." Caroline's fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. "Rachel," she said without looking up, "this will get unpleasant." "I know. He may fight." "Probably. He may try to claim financial partnership." "Let him." Caroline finally looked up. The expression on her face had shifted slightly. "You're not angry," she said. I shook my head. "Anger is messy." Caroline nodded once. "Preparation is better." She printed the first stack of documents and slid them across the desk. "Sign here." As I picked up the pen, my phone vibrated. "Daniel." The call rang once. Twice. 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. Daniel called 4 more times before noon. I didn't answer any of them. Each call quietly disappeared into voicemail while I sat in Caroline's office, signing paperwork that would shape the next stage of my life. I drove back to Toledo that afternoon. The highway stretched through miles of farmland and quiet towns. My phone buzzed several more times along the way. Daniel again, then his mother, then a number I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had turned the deep orange color late September brings just before sunset. The house looked exactly the same. White siding, 3 bedrooms, the maple tree in the front yard just beginning to change color. 6 years of memories inside those walls. And suddenly it felt less like a home and more like a structure I was about to rebuild. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the night before. I set my purse down, poured a small bourbon, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The first thing I did was organize the evidence. Jake's video, bank records, transaction histories, everything that proved ownership, everything that proved Daniel had none. At some point, I noticed the bourbon glass was still full. I hadn't taken a single sip. Monday morning arrived like any other workday. I woke at 6. Coffee, shower, dark gray suit. When you run a manufacturing plant, routine becomes second nature. Production schedules don't pause because your personal life collapses. At 7:45 a.m., I walked across the factory floor. Machines hummed. Forklifts moved pallets. Workers nodded greetings. Normal. At 10:02 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel. I watched his name flash across the screen. Then I turned the phone face down on my desk. It rang for nearly 30 seconds before stopping. 10 minutes later, it rang again. By 11, he had called 4 times. 4 voicemails waited on my phone. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, at lunch, I drove downtown to First Mayor Bank. The branch manager, Patricia Ellison, had known me for nearly a decade. She understood discretion. "Rachel," she said when I stepped into her office, "what can I help you with?" "I need a record," I said. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What kind of record?" I unfolded a document. "A cashier's check, 3 years ago." She typed quickly. "Amount?" "50,000. Her fingers paused. "That's memorable." It was. A moment later, she turned the screen toward me. There it is. The transaction record appeared clearly. $50,000 cashier's check. Payee, Daniel Hammond. Memo. Business startup loan. Patricia glanced at the memo line. "That wording may matter," she said. I was hoping so. She printed several certified copies. "Anything else?" she asked. "Yes." I handed her another page. "These credit cards." Daniel had been an authorized user on 3 of them. Patricia studied the numbers. "Do you want to remove his authorization?" "Yes." Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. "Done. Also close the accounts." She looked up. "All of them?" "Yes." Within minutes, the cards were terminated. One quiet advantage of never merging finances. When the paperwork finished printing, Patricia handed me the folder. "If a legal dispute is developing," she said carefully, "you may also want to freeze shared assets." "There aren't any." She nodded approvingly. "Then you planned well." Back in my car, I finally sent Daniel a message. Just one sentence. "Talk to your lawyer." Then I blocked his number. Caroline called that evening. "It's done," she said. "The filings are complete." "How long before they're active?" "They already are." "And Daniel? He'll realize something's wrong soon." "Good." We hung up. For the first time since the wedding, the house felt slightly lighter. But the feeling didn't last long. 2 days later, Wednesday evening, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Toledo area code. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. "Hello?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then a small voice said, "Rachel." I recognized it immediately. Emma, Daniel's daughter. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently. "What's going on?" She sounded nervous. "I wasn't supposed to call you." "That's okay." A long pause. Then she whispered, "I need to tell you something about my dad." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "What is it?" Emma took a shaky breath. "There's a man who comes to the house sometimes." My stomach tightened. "What man?" "His name is Rick. He has a motorcycle." Connor liked motorcycles. That part tracked. "Do you know his last name?" "No," Emma said, "but he comes over when you're at work." "Does your dad know him?" "Yes." Her voice dropped even lower. "They talk about money a lot." Cold tension spread through my chest. "What kind of money?" Emma hesitated. "Last week they were arguing." "About what?" Her answer came quietly. "The lake house." The words hit like ice water. "What about it?" Emma whispered. "They said they could sell it." I stared at the wall across the kitchen. The lake house was inherited property. Daniel's name had never been attached to it. Ever. "Emma," I said carefully, "did your dad say how he would sell it?" "I don't know," she said. "But Rick said they could split the money." Pieces were beginning to form a shape. This wasn't just cheating. This was planning. "Emma," I said softly, "thank you for telling me." "Are you mad?" she asked nervously. "No," I said. "You did the right thing." When the call ended, I immediately dialed Caroline. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you're calling with good news." "I'm not." I explained everything Emma had said. When I finished, Caroline said 2 words. "File a lien." "How fast?" "Tomorrow morning." "If Daniel tries to forge paperwork or sell property he doesn't own," she said calmly, "that becomes criminal fraud." "Good." Caroline paused. "Rachel?" "Yes." "This is starting to look bigger than a relationship problem." I stared out the kitchen window into the dark yard. I know, because suddenly the truth was impossible to ignore. The wedding humiliation, the hidden kiss, the strange financial pressure. Rick, the lake house. It looked less like a mistake and more like a plan. The next afternoon, when I pulled into my driveway, a pickup truck was parked beside the curb. An older man stood beside it. Gray hair, work jacket. I recognized him immediately. Robert Hammond, Daniel's father. He was holding an envelope, and judging by the expression on his face, whatever was inside it was going to make things worse. He walked toward me slowly. "Rachel," he said. "Robert." For a moment, neither of us moved. Finally, he handed me the envelope. "County records," he said. Inside was an official document. Notice of land filing. Lake property. I looked up. "How did you get this?" "It was mailed to my house this morning." That made sense. Caroline had filed it earlier that day. Robert rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't understand what it meant at first," he admitted. "Then I called Daniel." "And?" He wouldn't explain. That sounded exactly like Daniel. Robert studied my face. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I could have avoided the conversation, but there was no point. "The wedding," I said simply. His shoulders sagged. "I heard something about that. Daniel introduced me as a friend." Robert closed his eyes briefly. "I see. Then my son sent me a video." Robert frowned. "What video?" I pulled out my phone and played Jake's recording. Daniel laughing. The woman in the black dress. The kiss. When it ended, Robert stared at the screen for several seconds. "That woman," he said quietly. "Yes. That's Melissa Dalton." The name landed heavily. "You know her?" Robert nodded grimly. "She's Daniel's ex." So Jake hadn't caught random cheating. Daniel had gone back to someone from his past. Robert shook his head slowly. "I warned him about her years ago." "That's not the worst part," I said. He frowned. "There's worse?" "Yes." I looked down at the envelope. "Emma called me yesterday." His expression changed immediately. "What did she say?" "There's a man named Rick visiting the house." Robert's jaw tightened. "Rick Dalton. You know him?" He nodded. "He's Melissa's cousin." That piece fit the puzzle too neatly. "Emma overheard them talking about selling my lake house," I said. Robert's eyes widened. "Selling it?" "Yes. That property isn't even in Daniel's name." "I know." For several seconds, he stared at the ground. Then he said something I didn't expect. "There's something else." My stomach tightened. "What?" He took another envelope from his jacket pocket. "Bank paperwork. I co-signed a loan for Daniel 2 weeks ago." "How much?" Robert swallowed. 50,000. The number echoed in my head. "Another 50,000. What did he say it was for?" "Inventory expansion," Robert said bitterly. "And you believed him?" "He's my son." I nodded slowly. "Where did the money go?" Robert shook his head. "That's the problem." He handed me the paperwork. The loan had been issued 14 days earlier. Withdrawn entirely in cash. Gone. Just like that. Robert looked pale. "My house is collateral," he said quietly. If Daniel defaulted, the bank could take Robert's home. I pulled out my phone and called Caroline. She answered immediately. "Rachel, you're on speaker." "Okay." I explained everything. The loan, Rick, Melissa, the withdrawals. When I finished, Caroline said one word. "Interesting." That's one way to describe it. "Rachel," she said calmly, "put Robert on the phone." Robert straightened slightly. For the next 10 minutes, Caroline walked him through the details. Dates, loan documents, bank names, withdrawal patterns. Finally, she asked, "Mr. Hammond, are you willing to testify if necessary?" Robert didn't hesitate. "Yes." When the call ended, he handed the phone back. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now Caroline starts digging." And she did. Fast. By the next morning, she had the first piece. Rick Dalton, age 42, lives in Perrysburg. Previous fraud charges 5 years earlier. Settled out of court. But the pattern was obvious. Small financial scams, short partnerships, then disappearing money. Caroline called me later that afternoon. "You're not going to believe this." "Try me." Rick posted on social media yesterday. "What kind of post?" "A photo." "With what?" "A brand new motorcycle." I closed my eyes. "How much?" "About 30,000. And the caption? Caroline read it aloud. "Big score this month." The words hung between us. "So the money's gone," I said. "Most of it." "And Robert's house is collateral?" "Yes." I exhaled slowly. "This keeps getting worse." Caroline's voice stayed calm. "For you, it's actually getting better." "How?" "Because now this isn't just civil." I understood immediately. Fraud. Conspiracy. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. My plant supervisor knocked on my office door. "Rachel?" "Yeah? You need to see this." He turned his phone toward me. It was a video. The vineyard reception. Daniel signing the guest book. The coordinator asking who I was. Daniel smiling. "Oh, she's just a friend." Then my voice. "Calm. Actually, I'm just the ex." The clip ended with me walking away. "How many views?" I asked. 3,000 upvotes already. "Where?" "Reddit." By the end of the day, it had millions. The internet loved it. They called it savage, legendary, the perfect exit. Public opinion didn't matter to me, but it changed something. Daniel's lawyer called Caroline that evening, offering a settlement. Caroline didn't hesitate. "No." "Why not?" I asked. "Because the criminal case is already moving." She paused. "Let him swim?" 3 months later, the Lucas County Courthouse felt colder than the autumn air outside. Polished wood, fluorescent lights, the quiet weight of consequences. I sat beside Caroline. Across the room sat Daniel Hammond. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but the confidence that once filled his posture had disappeared. Beside him, his lawyer flipped through a binder of paperwork that wouldn't save him. Behind Daniel sat his father. Robert looked exhausted but resolute. Connor sat beside him, staring at the floor. Emma wasn't there. Caroline had insisted on that. Children shouldn't watch their parents collapse in court. At exactly 9 o'clock, the judge entered. All rise. Judge Patricia Kendrick took her seat. Known for patience, known for zero tolerance for deception. The bailiff announced the case. Carter versus Hammond. Caroline stood first. Her opening statement was simple, clear, emotionless. The $50,000 loan, the bank records, the withdrawals tied to Rick Dalton, the attempted discussions about selling property Daniel did not own. Then the evidence, certified bank records, the cashier's check, the memo line, business startup loan, then the withdrawal pattern, then Rick Dalton's financial history. Finally, Jake's video. Daniel and Melissa behind the hedge, laughing, standing too close, then kissing. The courtroom stayed silent. The judge made a small note. Daniel stared down at the table. Robert testified next. Watching him take the stand was difficult. He looked 10 years older than 3 months ago. Caroline asked simple questions. Did you co-sign a loan for your son? Yes. For how much? $50,000. And what collateral secured that loan? My house. When the testimony ended, the judge leaned back in her chair. She spoke directly to Daniel. Your defense relies heavily on the claim of financial partnership. Daniel nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. She held up the cashier's check. But the documentation contradicts that claim. Daniel's lawyer tried to interrupt. The judge raised her hand. I have reviewed the evidence. Silence returned. Then she delivered the ruling. Mr. Hammond has no legal claim to Miss Carter's home, inherited lake property, or financial assets. Daniel's shoulders dropped. The court orders repayment of the $50,000 loan with interest within 18 months. She looked directly at him. Failure to comply will result in wage garnishment. Then she added one final sentence. This court also notes that a separate criminal investigation regarding financial fraud remains pending. The gavel struck. Court adjourned. 14 months later, the house felt different. Saturday morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen while I made waffles. Jake sat at the counter with a calculus book open. Across from him, Emma watched the waffle iron like it was a magic trick. Is it ready yet? She asked. 30 seconds. You said that 30 seconds ago. That was a different 30 seconds. Jake smirked. You know, he said, this house is way calmer than it used to be. Emma nodded. Way calmer. They weren't wrong. The tension that had lived here quietly for years was gone. A few months after the trial, I made another decision. I sold the lake house. Half the money went into 2 trust funds. One for Jake, one for Emma. The rest went back into the manufacturing plant to fund an expansion project we had postponed for years. Emma finished her waffle and leaned back happily. Best breakfast ever. Jake snorted. You say that every time. Emma shrugged. Because it's always true. The front door opened. Jake glanced toward the hallway. That must be Caroline. A moment later, Caroline Hayes stepped into the kitchen carrying 2 coffees. Morning, she said. She set one in front of me. Your usual. Over the past months, her visits had become routine. At first, it was legal follow-ups, then coffee, then dinner, then quiet evenings on the porch. Nothing rushed. Just something steady growing between 2 people who both understood how fragile trust could be. Caroline leaned against the counter beside me. You look lighter, she said. Jake raised an eyebrow. Lighter? Caroline smiled. Less weight on her shoulders. Emma nodded seriously. That's because Daniel doesn't live here anymore. Caroline laughed softly. Well, she said, that's one explanation. Later that afternoon, Caroline and I stood on the back porch, watching the kids throw a football in the yard. The maple tree had turned bright red, leaves drifting slowly through the air. Caroline rested her elbows on the railing. You know, she said, that moment at the vineyard started everything. I nodded. One sentence. She looked at me. What exactly did he say again? I smiled faintly. He said I was just a friend. Caroline shook her head. Funny thing about truth, she said. It tends to expose everything else. I watched Jake toss the football to Emma. She missed and laughed. Peace had arrived quietly. Not through revenge. Not through anger. Just through walking away when the truth finally showed itself. Sometimes the worst moment in your life turns out to be the doorway. The moment you finally leave.